Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, some thoughts on reading challenges. So I've just finished a reading challenge personally, which ended up being quite difficult, but a positive experience overall. And I was kind of reflecting back on that, and I thought I would talk about it on the channel, but also talk more broadly about the kind of challenges that people set themselves, and my thoughts on those. So my particular challenge was I came up with a list of 50 books that I wanted to read before I turned 50. So I turned 50 at the end of April, and I wanted to get through this list of books before I hit that date. I mean, really, it was kind of an arbitrary thing. You know, I had a milestone birthday coming up, and I thought I would tie that in with a reading project. But the list I came up with was, by and large, not 100%, but by and large, a list of books that were things I perceived to be gaps in my reading. So, you know, particular authors who you know, people talk about a lot, who I hadn't got around to reading. Sometimes authors who are you know, kind of foundational authors in the genres I like, crime and horror, and really books that I felt would make me a more well-rounded reader if I read them, but particularly focusing on the kind of things I talk about on the channel. So in a lot of ways, it was a way for me to try and feel more confident in my own knowledge of the genres I'm talking about, by filling some of the gaps I have in those genres. So I'll put the full list of the 50 books I read in the show notes for the video, so you can peruse them at your leisure and look through them. I'm not going to list them all, and I'm not going to talk about all the books that I read. I've done that in, you know, various weekly and monthly wrap-ups videos over the course of the year. So you can go back and look at those videos should you want to hear my thoughts on a particular book. But what I wanted to do was just reflect on how the challenge felt overall and whether I feel it was a positive thing. So before I do that, let's talk about the fact I had 4 DNFs. So there were 4 books out of that 50 that I didn't finish. And I was fine with that, because when I came up with this list, I knew that there were books on there that I might not get on with. You know, I was deliberately picking, you know, some of the books I chose were books I was deliberately picking because I felt like I needed to try them. So, you know, a great example of that is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. So, you know, it's not necessarily a crime or horror book, but I felt like it was a book I should at least attempt. And I did attempt it, and I read like 100 pages or so and decided it wasn't for me. And I am a big fan of DNFing. I think it's almost always the right thing to do for readers. And it doesn't mean, you know, as I've said on the channel before, it doesn't mean you're never going to read the book. It just means you're not going to read the book now. So I did DNF 4 books. War and Peace, to be honest with you, wasn't a huge surprise to me that I DNF'd it. 2 of the others I DNF'd were a bigger surprise. So one of those was Horns by Joe Hill. So Joe Hill, you know, a big author in the horror genre nowadays. I've read a couple of books by him which I quite enjoyed, but Horns I just couldn't get on with at all. And then Songs for a Dead Dreamer by Thomas Ligotti. So Ligotti, again, you know, a very, very well respected horror author. One I hadn't read at all, so I was really keen to read. But I have to say, there are a couple of stories in that collection I liked. You know, in the half of the collection or so that I read, there are a couple of stories I liked, but a lot of the stories I just found really, really hard work. But as I say, I think it's fine to DNF books. But what we should do is try. You know, we should try and read different things. We should try and push ourselves every so often, and that's very much what I was trying to do with this challenge. And you know, it was difficult at times. I think it was difficult for 2 reasons, which are kind of linked. So one was, by setting myself this challenge, I pretty much had, you know, it didn't take up everything I read for the 4 months I was doing the challenge for, but clearly it was a large proportion of my reading over that time was books from this list. And what that meant was I knew what I was going to be reading in advance, which to an extent I quite like that the comfort of knowing that I've got, you know, a plan for what I'm going to read, particularly because I need to make videos for the channel about reading. But I did feel a bit constrained at times, and you know, therefore the flip side of that was that I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to read lighter, fluffier things. So that, you know, that list of 50, because I was deliberately trying to push myself and deliberately trying to read books that, where I felt like I had a gap in my knowledge, there was not a lot of fluff in there. There were a couple of things from the fluffier side, like I read one of the Casca, the Eternal Mercenary books, which was a lot of fun. But what I wasn't able to do was just randomly pick a men's adventure book or a Harlequin romance or something like that off my shelves and read that. And that did feel difficult. My diet felt a bit too rich at times. Particularly because a lot of the books I was reading were classics. So if you think about crime, so I read a lot of really well respected authors. So I read some Dashiell Hammett, I read some Raymond Chandler, I read some David Goodis, and I really enjoyed all of them. But you can have too much of a good thing sometimes, can't you? And I think sometimes if you only read great books, you don't appreciate them as much. Sometimes it's nice to read something that you can just switch your brain off for. You don't have to think about too much. That doesn't demand anything from you, because that then, when you do read a great book, you get that sense of contrast. And I'm a big fan of trashy books. I talk about trashy books on the channel a lot, and that's part of the reason I think that trashy books are important for a balanced reading diet. Is if you only read, if you ate out at a 5-star restaurant every day of your life, you get sick of that food fairly quickly. You would want beans on toast after a while. I certainly would. So I think I really think balance is important. And what ended up being the case for me with this 50 before 50 thing, I think because I was doing it over a fairly short amount of time. I was doing it over like 4 months. And I kind of blew the first month because I had a load of other commitments. So it ended up really being over 3 months. Because I was, my reading was constrained for that period, because I didn't have that long to do it. I didn't have as much room to read other things as I might have done. So that I definitely felt constrained by it at times. But it did end up feeling like a really, really positive experience, and I'm really glad. Even the books I DNF'd, I'm glad I tried them, particularly the Ligotti and particularly War and Peace as well, actually. But the books I finished, I do feel like I feel like I have improved my my overall knowledge, particularly of the crime genre. I did read some kind of classic horror that I hadn't read before, but it's really the crime genre where I felt like I had a bigger gap. And I read the first book in a number of really popular long-running series like the Martin Beck series, the Wallander series, the Adam Dalgliesh series. The the Spencer series. So I've read the first book in all of those series, and that felt good, and I really enjoyed all of them. But also I felt like I got a really nice variety by reading different books from different series that have very, very different styles to them. So whilst I was constrained in some ways, I did do a pretty good job of picking books that did give me a bit of variety. So yeah, it was a positive experience, and I would encourage. I think it's worth doing this kind of thing every so often, but I don't think you should do it all the time. And one of the traps I've found personally with BookTube is there are always events going on. So if I look at the next few months, it's April this month, and I say I'm not doing any events. I've actually read books for 3 different events this month. But next month is May, so there's Horror Mayhem, which I'm a host for. The month after that is June on the Range, which I'll definitely be taking part in. So a Western reading event, and then the month after that is BookTube at War, so an event focusing on on war novels and non-fiction. And then the month after that, August, will be my reading event, which I'm the main host of, Garb August, where we read trashy books. And it's fantastic to take part in events like that. I think it's a great way to be part of the BookTube community and to meet other readers, because events like that always have nice discussions going on in the comments on videos and discussions going on the host's Discord servers and things like that. So it's a great way to become part of the community and to meet other people and other readers with similar interests. I think the danger is if you're focusing on a particular event for a month and you only read books for that event and you don't read anything else in the month, it can be a bit overwhelming. And that's kind of where I got to with the 50 before 50 challenge. I was able to fit in a few other things, but too much of my reading was constrained. And I've said You know, when if you ate in a 5-star restaurant all the time, you'd want baked beans after a while. When I did Garb August last year, where I spent a month only reading trashy books, I only read trashy books in August last month, and that was too much. That was like having, you know, fish fingers and oven chips every night and never having any vegetables. So, you know, what I'm trying to say is there's a balance. And I think reading events are great. I think it's important for us to try and push ourselves as readers every so often and try and read some, you know, more challenging books. But if you don't want to, then fine. Reading should be fun. Reading should be entertaining. For many of us, for most of the people watching this video, I would imagine that reading is one of your main hobbies, if not your main hobby. So it should be something that's entertaining. But I do think, you know, for me personally, pushing myself every so often to read things that are a bit more challenging, or just to try and, as I've said, fill gaps in my reading past, I think is worthwhile for me. But balance is really, really important. And I've come to realise, having done BookTube for, you know, a year and a half now, it's very easy to get swept up in all these events. But for me, the really important thing is to always leave room for other things. Because if you only read horror for a month, you know, that can be a bit much. If you only read westerns for a month, that can be a bit much. And you can end up losing sight of what makes that genre special. If you immerse yourself completely in it, you can forget about what makes it different. You can forget about the particular qualities that a certain genre or style of books have, if that's all you're reading. So that contrast, as I said earlier, that contrast is, I think, really, really important. So yes, a bit of a rambly video today, but those are my thoughts on reading events and my own, you know, particular reflections on my 50 before 50 challenge. So it was definitely worth doing. I'm really glad I did it, but boy, was it difficult at times. Okay, time for a random book from the shelf. So this is a book, because of its reputation, that I think I probably would have included in my 50 before 50 challenge had I not already read it. So that book is The Fisherman by John Langan, which is a rather literary but nevertheless really readable and really effective horror novel, which has a lot of kind of Lovecraftian things, but also has kind of a bit of a Stephen King vibe to it, I think, in terms of the way it's written. So yeah, definitely one I recommend. I thought it was an excellent book. So I hope you found that interesting. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on reading events. Are you the kind of person who throws yourself completely into a reading event and doesn't read anything else that month? Or do you like a bit more variety? And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.